Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 12th and probably least formal thus far of the episodes of the Two Existential Dudes podcast.
Yeah. I was going to go with least prepared, but formal is a good way of putting it too. We're both currently wearing... What is the term? Yours has a neck, mine doesn't.
I don't know. I bought this specifically for, lounging.
I mean, it looks good, so good choice. I'll give you that.
Yeah, I like it.
But it is a cold, dreary Monday, and today we're going to be talking about the 7 deadly sins and their associated 7 heavenly virtues. Virtues. That's one for today. So to begin right off the bat, let's just go through what we found to be those 7 sins.
Okay.
Do you want me to go through them?
I'll go through them. We've. Is there a particular order I would like to go in?
There is an order, but I'm not going to talk about that yet.
Okay. Pride. Are we defining them now?
If you'd like to. Yeah.
Okay.
Why not? So I typically take pride to mean hubris, which is excessive pride, as compared to just being proud of what you do, because that's not necessarily bad.
And we are not... Hope they heard the cat. It's pretty wrathful of the cat. Are we going into the virtues, the corresponding virtues, or right now, or should we do that later?
Let's just go into the sins for now.
All right.
And then we'll compare them as we go, because they don't relate exactly.
Okay. Greed. This one is pretty self-explanatory. Wait, was this avarice?
Yes.
Yes.
The one we looked up immediately prior.
This one has a more technical name called avarice.
So use that in your essays to sound cool.
Oh yeah. Wrath, which
most typically is in regards to anger,
rage, hate, something. The dark side.
The dark side. Only a Sith deals in absolutes.
The next one is envy,
which also seems very straightforward. Although I do always feel that envy is quite interrelated with greed. And perhaps even pride.
Yes. Some of these are interrelated, and I'll certainly get to that when I'll go off on a spiel about how society encourages 4 to 5 of these of the 7. Of the 7, 5 of these are now considered virtuous almost in modern society.
Now, if that isn't a teaser trailer, I don't know what is. All right, next up we have
lust. Did I say that?
I should have finished the sentence.
Did I say that well enough?
Sometimes I appreciate your inflection. Shh, don't get mad at me. A wrathful cat. Are you okay now? I think he's fine.
Yeah, definitely the least formal and least prepared. Number 7. 6. Yes. Right now is gluttny.
This also is very important, notable today.
Yeah. This would be described as overindulgent. It usually relates to food and
alcohol.
Overconsumption.
It's most famously associated with drunkards.
Ah, yes.
Like the gluttonous drunkard who leads to the wrathful man.
And then perhaps the most pervasive, sloth. Easily described as laziness.
Just think of the animal sloths.
Yeah.
That's where I presume that's where the name comes from. At least the name of the animal, I would presume, reflects that.
Yeah.
And sloth, as a definition, is simply the utmost laziness, in short.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for spinning my own notes back at me. So, I think we'll get right into it. Which one of them? You suggested that sloth is the most pervasive, and I'd like to hear why.
Well, I'd say it. When you think of most of these, that some of them are very clear as to why they are sinful.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas sloth, or to use a more colloquial term, laziness, is seen almost as neutral between sinful and virtuous.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's one of those things that, and this gets to me when people say this, like, well, you're not hurting anyone, therefore it's not sinful.
Right. Which, by these definitions, it still can be.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, sloth can be harmful to yourself. Same thing with gluttony. Honestly, all of them are, with the exception of perhaps wrath and pride, I feel that a significant number of these cardinal sins, the 7 deadly sins as they are most strongly detrimental to your soul as opposed to a physical world. Because having crazed envy, and connect that to lust in a way, of another individual, unless you act upon that, it does not affect them. But it disenfranchises the character that you have.
Mm-hmm.
So they're very much things that you have to address within yourself, perhaps through introspection.
Ah, yes.
And then compare them to the heavenly virtues, which we'll get into.
This is why I would say it's not enough just to not act these things out in the real world. Like, obviously, if you do, that's very bad.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we have things called laws.
Yeah, most of these, there's a law associated with them.
Yeah.
Most of them. Some, obviously, sloth you can't really. Unless, well, sloth you could associate with worker...
Capitalism?
Yeah, like with worker efficiency.
Yeah. And
like losing your job to being slothful.
Yeah.
I don't know about pride, though. That one's a little different.
That one's... I guess we're just going to run with this.
Yeah.
That one is... I guess you could say that one is self-imposed. It's like a self-imposed punishment because... Oh, wait, I'm thinking envy. Never mind. I'll run with envy then.
Alright, envy.
It could be described as a self-imposed punishment in that as long as you're envious, you will never be satisfied with your life.
Absolutely, because it's always wanting the next thing as opposed to appreciating what you have. And I will say, I always hate the argument, well, be happy with what you have and don't want anything else. It is certainly okay to want more. Envy comes into play when it controls your life. And the reason I connect it so often to lust is because it can be typically associated with things like cheating in a relationship. When there isn't, I would say there isn't much wrong with wanting more. Initially, at least. It's a very fine line.
I would say there's more of a distinction to draw there in that it depends on the reason you are seeking more and what that more is. Mm-hmm. Like, if you are seeking knowledge or seeking to gain a skill or improve at something, like this happened, like with, just to use a personal example, I would call myself envious of some of your skills.
And you.
And I wouldn't necessarily classify that as sinful.
No, I would.
Until it got to a point where it, I don't know. Go.
I would say that at that point, it sounds more of admiration and respect.
Okay.
In that you see, we actually had a discussion on this the other day, and that you see something you wish to represent or aspire to be like, and it's less of wanting that and more of wanting to become that.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
So I think I'm finally getting back around to what I wanted to say.
Yes.
If it's envy in the way that I think it's not fair that he has these skills, therefore I've been wronged by God or the universe.
Yes.
For not having been bestowed these skills, rather than, wow, this person's really good at something. Mm-hmm. If I want to get there, I can look at what they did, the work they put in, the things they did to develop that.
Certainly, because then you're not blaming something.
Yeah.
And as soon as you're blaming something, you're denying yourself the capacity to do that. And as we've discussed before, everyone has that mm-hmm. capacity. It's mm-hmm. how much they put into it to achieve it.
It really all does go back to how much agency you allow yourself over your own life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. If only there was a podcast that discussed that in depth. If only.
Quick sidebar. It's become so pervasive in our discussions with other people that anytime anything remotely related to our podcast is brought up, we say, if only there was a podcast that addresses this.
Because in most of them, we've spent like an hour discussing exactly the thing we're talking about there.
Yeah.
So it's like, if only there was a really great discussion on this. Although, are those good discussions? Some of them. Some of them. Episode 10 is.
Oh, yeah.
Episode 10 is.
Usually we'll just end up restating what we said. Sometimes better, sometimes worse.
Never the same.
No.
That's the key thing there. Where were we? We got off track.
Pick one. Talk about it.
But yeah, yes, with envy, it's certain you do have to draw that distinction almost in a case by case basis. In that, a parent who has I don't know, 2 children, and they live in a rough home and they don't have a lot of money, they may be envious of the other families that have the means to get to better education. At that point, that parent can do one of 2 things. They can be envious in the way that they want to have that same opportunity for their children, so they make that opportunity happen. Or they can be envious in the way that they want it, but they blame society for not giving it to them. In other words, how much capacity do they allow themselves?
Yes.
Agency, to use your word. I always use capacity. He always uses agency. Mine's better.
What else could you use? Accountability, responsibility.
Accountability's good.
Shall we do pride? I think pride might be the most difficult one to describe and explain why it's bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is why whenever I go through them, I don't typically list pride as pride. I most typically list it as hubris, which again is, if you think of, are you familiar with the Odyssey?
Yes.
Odysseus is famous, the hubris of his soldiers, in that they were so excessively proud of what they did, they literally massacred cities. Which, in the story, kills them all, except Odysseus, because he maintains it. His controlled pride.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, side note, that's not fair, Mr. Cat. You're all cute and you rub against my leg and then you yell at me. Anyways, that's where I like to draw the distinction. In effect, pride isn't so bad as it's like, I'm proud of what I do, or I'm proud of this group I'm in, or the things we've done as a team, and the aspirations I hope to achieve. Pride becomes dangerous when it's narcissistic and serves the purpose of entirely making you feel better, even if it isn't necessarily earned. Particularly when it's the case where you think you're great, but you're not. Or you know you're great, and you make sure everyone knows that.
I actually, like, in my research, which totally wasn't done 20 minutes before this podcast started,
20 minutes? I think you mean 5.
He walked in my house, and I was writing stuff down frantically.
For once, I have more notes than you. This is making up for when we did the book, and he had like 15 pages.
But anyway, I found that a good contrast to pride was humility, in that it described humility as being very good at something, but knowing that you don't have to tell the world that. And I think this kind of goes into some things the Bible says about not needing your good deeds to be shown publicly, things like that.
Yeah, it's almost respectful pride, in that perhaps you know you're good at what you do, perhaps you don't, but the method through which you demonstrate that is not by telling people, but by not necessarily showing people, but showing individuals in a way that is helpful and constructive to them. A good example of this, say you're good at math. Well, you could go around saying you're a brilliant mathlete, you know 40,000 digits of pi, all that stuff.
Flaunt your 36 ACT.
I think you mean 37. You can do that. That's where we get into the cardinal sin of pride, because then it's using it for your own self-fulfillment. Short-term fulfillment. Meanwhile, someone who is exceptional at all that stuff as well could spend their time tutoring students who struggle in basic courses. Now, this student could be able to do calculus and advanced physics, but they don't make a point of always conveying that, even when they're working with students on elementary math, because that's not what is necessary. They're using their skills to aid others in a way that is constructive. And I would argue, by doing something like that, you get significantly more respect, because then it demonstrates you are a controlled and reserved individual who knows when to use their skills and doesn't make a show of it.
I would use the example of someone we used to know in our band, a fantastic saxophone player who I think you know where I'm going with this.
I think so.
Or maybe
just go ahead. Let's see where this goes.
A fantastic saxophone player who played pretty much everything perfectly. Any piece of music you gave to her, she could play it flawlessly and super expressively. Never once did I ever hear her show off in any capacity or do anything like that. And that's incredibly respectable, because she probably knew that she was pretty good.
Oh, she knew it.
Yeah.
She knew it because she was very good, and everyone made sure she knew that.
Yeah.
But she was an incredibly humble individual, and in fact, she was so humble to the point that she went out of her way to help everyone around her. So much so that much of our band program regarded her as, quote, the mother of the band, because she had such a motherly character, in that she was very good at what she did, did not tell you that, but helps you when you needed it. And you knew you could go to her to help you, because she had the skills.
Similarly to her musical ability, she never flaunted the fact that everyone liked her, or that she was this incredibly respected and revered figure.
Yeah. That's a very good way of a good example to use.
Greed. Next.
Sure, I don't have much to clarify on that.
I guess this could be a good segue. It's been a few episodes. I guess this could be a good segue into a point I was going to make about society accepting some of these, in that they're not stigmatized enough, almost not regarded as sins anymore. And the ones I would place into this category are, well, not as much greed, but maybe greed when you get into sort of the typical, like, businessman or something like that.
The whole economic debate.
Whose whole life is centered around accumulating wealth and things like that. But more so than greed, I would put certainly pride in this category. Envy in this category, which that kind of goes along with greed as well, because wanting what someone else has.
Being greedy of the things they have and wanting it yourself.
We're almost instructed that that's a good thing. To, like, feel...
I wouldn't say instructed, I'd say conditioned.
Okay.
In that no one is telling you,
that is a much better word.
It's accepted. Operant condition. Anyone?
We almost feel entitled to what someone else has done or accomplished.
Yeah, this is what I was getting at earlier with my example of the parent who blames society for not giving them the opportunity, in that in some cases it is society's fault, but in many cases it does rest on the shoulders of the individual. And I feel that's a great point to make there, because that greed and that envy, to say we almost regard it as we deserve it, demonstrates we do not.
The next one that I would definitely say falls into this category, which we haven't talked about yet, is lust. And for this one, look no further than any song, any pop song on the radio.
There is a phenomenal chart I've seen, basically cataloging the past 100 years of popular music and what percentage of it makes some reference to love, affection, sexual interaction, and quite in some cases genitalia, which is weird to think about and I don't want to think about. But it's a really fun chart because it's much higher than you think it is. All of them. Most often it's I forget what the exact term is, but it's like the feeling of wanting and a desire, I suppose. But if you haven't seen it, definitely look it up. It's a fun chart.
I think the glorification of, like, the love at first sight, one night stand kind of thing, or not even one night stand, because that implies that it's temporary, whereas a lot of these songs kind of prop up this idea that you will have a one night stand and then have a fulfilling relationship.
Now this is fascinating and like a total tangent, but why is that? Why do so many of our popular songs that so many individuals know, sing, and consider that they can associate with themselves are about fulfilling lifelong relationships, and yet all of the individuals who act in a way that they believe those songs reflect them the most, act entirely in short-term relationships? Because on one hand, I think the message of those songs, not the short-term songs, but the long-term songs, is a good idea, because you get, we talked about before, the long time garnered relationships and all that stuff. But
very recently, actually.
Yeah, actually. It feels like a very strange dichotomy to have those songs expressing those ideas, the individuals saying they align with them and want to have that, and then proceed to directly subvert it. So I'd like to ask you, why do you think that is?
That is a question that deserves. we could do an episode on pop music and a lot of things you just alluded to. My guess is the reason is a lot of people envy the relationships that other people have that they hear about in these songs, these incredibly long and fulfilling relationships that people have. But because of our expedience and our immediacy and our feelings of immediacy towards everything in life, we're either incapable or unwilling to put in the work for that.
Perhaps it's...
So we fill in the gap by convincing ourselves that this is the way to achieve that.
In other words, we want it so desperately, we rush into something that may not be what will result in that kind of a relationship that we're seeking. That's fascinating. We might have to do an episode on that.
Oh, definitely.
That came out of nowhere.
Write it down. Write it down.
Write it down. What do I even write? Pop music and relationships, I suppose.
That we'll remember what it means.
We've discussed this many times. Effectively just cite ourselves. Although we shouldn't, because we should use actual sources.
Cite ourselves.
Cite ourselves. Alright, I think it's time that we get into the heavenly virtues.
Yeah, that's a very good idea.
So first of all, I'd like to define, of course, what a virtue is, because we've used it many times prior, and I never got the actual chance to give a good definition of it. I am going to use the definition that comes from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which is effectively the manifesto of the Catholic Church. Gasp. And I use this one because it's where the term virtue originates in combination with Greek literature and stuff. But for this argument, it also is heavily involved because these heavenly virtues are associated with Catholicism very heavily. So there's 7 of them, of course. I didn't give the definition yet, did I?
No.
I'll give the definition before I start listing them.
Yes.
So the Catechism defines it as they define a virtue as a habitual and firm disposition to do the good. Yes, it was the good.
The good.
As much as it felt wrong, it felt right. And before I list them, do you have anything you want to address in there?
In researching this, we each came across 2 different lists. So you can go through yours, and then I can briefly discuss and sort of figure out if mine are just a different way of stating yours.
Yeah, I did find a lot of them have different names.
Yeah.
We already talked about greed having multiple. So the heavenly virtues that I found, there's 4 classical ones relating to the Greeks, and then there's 3 theological ones, which are from Catholic theology. So first we have prudence, and then justice, temperance, and courage or fortitude. And then the theological ones, you have faith, hope, and charity. And to define it, prudence is effectively discipline through reason, being able to control your emotions through reason.
Yeah, this is incredibly similar to the one I found called diligence.
Yep. Yeah.
essentially, and this could be a lot of what predicates our discussions is foregoing being controlled by emotions in favor of being thoughtful about things.
Mm-hmm. When we've talked before about how you send me these long theses of just reasoned argument.
Yes.
That's absolutely like zero emotion, entirely filtered out, and they're brilliant to read. They take like 4 tries, but they're great to read. And I think that's the principle.
But they are about incredibly emotional things.
Ironically. And I feel like that's a prime example of prudence or discipline or diligence, in that you're effectively training yourself to stop emotion before it gets too far, control it, not necessarily destroy it, but control it in a way that you can reason with it and use it to come to a productive solution, as compared to if you just acted out on something, which, as we all know, emotions are temporary.
Rhetoric is forever. Joseph Kozar.
Episode 10. Go watch it. It's one of his
Please
phrases.
go watch it.
Go watch it. Subscribe. Like. Don't forget to pay our sponsors.
Are we doing this again?
No. We'll do that later. The less we do it, the funnier it gets. Although it's not that funny to start.
Next one.
You mean just go back through them?
Yeah.
So then there was justice, which I feel is relates to conscience, in that it's not necessarily upholding justice, which I would argue comes through courage, but knowing right from wrong,
knowing what is just.
Yeah, and being able to discern based on the circumstance what is the appropriate thing to do.
This isn't really related to that, but it's related to justice as a whole. Earlier today in one of my classes, I was faced with we were talking about death, and I was faced with the question, do you believe in an afterlife?
Well, now that's a blunt question.
In public school, which is strange to come across that. But I obviously didn't write any of this because I didn't care that much to write it down. But it got me thinking, for there to be ultimate justice, there would have to be an afterlife. We can only do, humans can bring justice to someone who has committed something bad. Like, take murder, for example. We can put a murderer in jail for life. We can take their life. But the person that they murdered does not in that way get a just life. They weren't done justice. The only way for that to happen truly would be to transcend this world into a heaven, and for the person who wronged them not to be allowed to pass.
Okay, that got dense quick. So
I didn't know I was going to go into that, but it was just a thought I had earlier.
I'm intrigued. So, okay. Are you saying that the only way to effectively provide justice to an individual is to bring them back?
No.
And then discipline the person who wronged them?
No. What I'm what I'm saying is that, especially in the case of someone losing their life,
Mm-hmm.
like, obviously worldly possessions you can give back to someone. You can
Most of the time, yeah.
you can compensate them for, usually, with the exception of, like, sentimental things.
Mm-hmm. Can't always replace.
But if that person no longer exists anywhere, if their consciousness ceases to exist when their body loses function, how can you claim there's ever justice there?
When it comes to something like murder, the justice is less the individual receiving payment, I suppose, for being wronged. For example, someone's house is robbed. They catch the robber there. They get financial compensation, the stuff back, or both.
Well, I wouldn't say it's.
But let me finish this. But when it comes to something like murder, you can't. The only way you can bring a form of justice is justice to those who were affected. Thus, someone who's caught for committing a murder might have to, in addition to serve a life sentence, or multiple in some cases, provide a financial compensation to the loved ones. Because in truth, unless that individual is still alive or you can compensate them post-death, which we as conscious humans cannot do. So there's no way of effectively past death, there's no way of compensating that. And I don't see where you get into the discussion of one individual doesn't pass as compensation, because I don't see how that is compensation. Because yes, the murdered individual lost their life, but they will most likely still pass on and hopefully receive heavenly benefits, if assuming a religious argument.
But in the event that on Earth we can only dictate justice one way. We can only punish the perpetrator. You cannot compensate the victim. In a divine way, or in a theological way, both sides would receive their justice.
And I don't see why our humanly system doesn't satisfy that. Because the punishment to the crime committer is a life sentence or compensation, or rather a financial charge, and then the compensation to the victim is knowing that individual is serving, and in some cases getting a settlement. So effectively, it's as much of a material exchange as we can do.
It's a life for a life.
Yes.
But essentially then, and this is some shaky territory because this gets into the death penalty, but then essentially the only way for us to provide true justice would be to kill that person. Because you can still, albeit a very limited one, you still have some form of a life in prison.
Now, I see what you mean about the death sentence. This is where we get tricky, because when someone is murdered, those who are, obviously they die, but those who are affected the next greatest measure are their closest loved ones. And to kill the felon effectively will just do the opposite in reverse to their own family, in a way hurting the family of the felon who were not involved. Which is where a lot of the discussion comes in, into the challenge of the electric chair, for example.
Yeah.
But you could... And this is why most often the argument comes to, perhaps it's better to keep... It's going to sound gruesome, but keep them alive and effectively torture them.
Yeah.
To make them know what they did. And just be clear, listeners, we're not stating any positions here.
We're not arguing the death penalty.
This is a discussion.
Yeah.
We will not argue that.
I don't want to argue that. I'm nowhere near equipped with the knowledge to argue that.
Indeed. So what I suppose I must ask then is, are you suggesting that the only true mediator and decider in justice is a divine force, in that humans cannot make a truly just decision or carry out something truly just as punishment or compensation?
Yes.
Interesting.
Because I stated the well, you could kill them, just as a hypothetical, as the only way humans could truly do justice, but then you spotted the fallacy in that being, it's causing, the only way to bring justice to that situation is to cause more injustice elsewhere. So yes.
Interesting. Yeah, and that's where the whole argument of things like the death penalty come into play, in that what is the most effective punishment to deal with that, and conversely, what is the most effective compensation to the victim? Because to some people it might be, I want them dead, and to some people it might be, I want a lot of money, and some people, they don't charge. It's fascinating, isn't it?
But even that would be a person's, even that would be a victim or a victim's family's subjective view of what justice is.
Oh boy, we're getting into objective.
It is not
objective things.
It's not absolute.
Oh boy.
Objective justice.
One of the few topics I said I would never discuss with you is objective judgment and morality, and here we are.
What's wrong with that discussion? That wasn't on the non-negotiables list.
Yet.
And we've breached the non-negotiables list a few times.
Multiple times.
We throw up the warning every time we do, but... Do you want to get back into the...
No, this is great. I'm having a lot of fun right now, actually.
Editor?
Huh?
Can you give me some water? I kind of need it after that.
There's a capsule over there. Come on. For the listeners. That's that's a very interesting discussion, particularly on the case of at what point, while we recognize these heavenly virtues, which one of us, if any of us, can truly provide a non-biased and completely omniscient decision regarding any of them. And that's where we get into the case of objective morality, and most often the discussion of the argument of, for there to be an objective morality, it might require a divine force to set that. Because as soon as you get into humans, oh great discussionable humans, you get nothing but subjective discussions. As opposed to, even scientific stuff can be subjective and conflicting.
The misuse of the word science bothers me a lot, because science is not a set of facts. Science is a method, is a means by which you arrive at and test hypotheses and Hypothesis?
Hypothesis, right?
Hypothesize? I don't know.
Hypothesis?
The plural of hypothesis.
What? If you know, let us know.
A means by which you test theories.
Well, yeah, because once it's a fact, it's just a fact.
Mm-hmm.
It's not... It can be the result of science, but science is just the method by which you get there. And that's why the scientific method is so famous in that it's a deliberately reasoned method that came about during the Enlightenment. That time of argument. When even music was overcome by argument. And not argument as in like figurative argument. No, literal theoretical music argument. Well, we went off the deep end.
We did. We really did.
We couldn't have gone farther.
You want to continue? We got through 2 of the heavenly virtues.
We got time. So, next up is temperance.
I have that one as well.
And this one is most typically associated with alcohol. Famously, the Puritans and some of those certain religions, and the temperance movement of the 1900s, and then 1890s.
So this would be the foil to gluttony.
Yes.
If we're forcing that.
These don't line up exactly, but if any, that one. And it's effectively restraint to gluttony. And I like to expand temperance to include not just famous, as history would say, alcohol, but things like slothful, time-wasting, gluttonous eating or activities, and things like that. Because at that point, it's not so much a discussion of resistance to alcohol, but resistance to gluttony and effectively being able to control oneself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Quit throwing your pencil. It's like the 4th time, man.
I don't have much to add on that one.
All right, next up is courage or fortitude. This one's a good one.
You're gonna have to define it for me to say anything.
Oh, okay. So, courage, as we know it, is strong in the face of danger, and being able to do things that take courage, and that you have to be strong-willed to get through them. But I like the word fortitude because it suggests not only physical danger, but like things like stress and mental strain and having to effectively sustain oneself through trials.
Yeah.
And thus, that's the 5th time. Quit throwing them. And thus, that's why I really like it, because it's saying you don't necessarily need to be off fighting dragons or fighting wars to be courageous, full of courage. But even youth have it facing social pressures and needing to push through it, school forcing you. All of that requires fortitude to surmount. Although there is a discussion on how much of that is genuine stress.
Oh wait, I was daydreaming a little there, and then you said there's a discussion to be had about genuine stress. Shall we have that discussion, or did we have that discussion enough in 9 and 11?
I think we've talked about that one enough.
Okay.
Hey, if you haven't seen those ones, watch it. It's intriguing, to say the least.
Certainly. We really did switch that in real time.
Are you proud of yourself?
Yeah.
because we weren't going to do the heavenly virtues, and then we did.
Yeah, and then it just pops.
You're gonna have to add objective morality to that list, among other things.
Did that really?
That didn't happen.
No, we did not do. We touched on it. We scratched the surface, but we did not do it justice.
On our document of
Justice.
on our document of potential podcast topics, the one labeled theology and objective morality is labeled
possible episode 100 lol.
Which I think captures how unprepared we are for that one.
Yeah.
If we do that, we'll bring Mr. Kozar back.
Oh, yeah.
And just let him talk. So do you have any discussion on courage?
I might say it can be difficult to conceptualize this one today, since we live in such a, for lack of a better term, safe world.
Mm-hmm.
Safe in a lot of ways. Safe from especially those first levels of the hierarchy of needs. Like,
mm-hmm. Most of those are fulfilled.
Most of those are fulfilled
for most individuals.
Yeah.
At least in the modern world.
Yeah. Developed,
quote unquote. I avoided it because I didn't want to have to do quotes, but that's fine.
Was modern any better?
Civilized world. No, guys, don't sue me. It was in quotes. So next up, the last three we have then are faith, hope, and charity, which I feel all relate together as the theological virtues. And they're very much the whole, how do you apply what you think these virtues to be in the world? In that you pursue your faith, be it religious or even, dare I say, academic, and you hope for better things.
Mm-hmm.
And through charity, you try to make the world better. And charity can be anything from service to donations to providing your skills, like we discussed, perhaps a math tutor.
Yeah.
That's certainly charity. But I would say that's the best form of charity, because you're giving something that hopefully you're good at and you enjoy, and provides not only you with a sense of fulfillment and pleasure, but presents it in a manner that is more often
it's also a lot
more acceptable.
It's also a lot more individual there too, in that money can come from anywhere, but the help you might be giving someone by doing that, even if it's not strictly academic, I would argue that's a higher form of charity. Like, we use them as examples all the time, but Mr. Kozar and Mr. Williams, they, like, if we had just read that knowledge, read what they taught us in their classes in a textbook, it would not have had nearly the same impact as
at all.
Yeah. And I would argue, even though they're teachers and they're being paid, it's still a form of charity, because they didn't have to add all that stuff. They didn't have to make it fulfilling on that next level.
A teacher's job is to get the content taught on the base level. That's it. That's what their contract says. Of course, things like keep the students safe, don't let someone in, that's all in there. But things like fulfill the students so that they can self-actualize. Are you joking me? No. That's definitely not in there.
Teach the students how to start a podcast.
No one taught us. That's why the first episodes were rough.
I dropped my pencil again.
6. I gotta get you a holder.
Holster for my pencil.
If only there was a table, or perhaps a binder that had holes in it that you could rest. There you go.
Like that?
There.
Do people do that? No. But what if I need to write something down? Or fidget with it? Because let's be honest, that's mostly what I'm doing with this.
For write it down, I was about to just grab it and let the pencil fall out, but for fidget, I don't know what to do with it. All right.
I have my list of ones that I found.
Yes. Which ones differ?
That are different than yours. Charity is the same. We discussed diligence as being very similar to prudence. Temperance is on here. I have chastity, which is a direct counter to lust, and also potentially a counter to gluttony as well, in that it's foregoing expedient carnal desires.
I would classify that as temperance.
Okay.
Because that's why I wanted to make the point of temperance includes more than just alcohol as historically associated, but things like food, sexual things, all that stuff.
So you would say these are kind of the same thing?
Yeah, chastity is a direct association with lust.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why it's kind of an inappropriate term now. But it also, in traditional Catholic theology, I have seen it also to regard things like chastity towards the other sins.
Yeah.
Particularly in demeanor and character.
Yeah.
Chastising yourself to have a proper character, which isn't really a thing anymore.
We also have humility, which we discussed earlier in relation to pride. I also have kindness, which is kind of a basic one.
That's lame.
I don't like the word kind.
That's not a big word.
I don't like the word kindness.
I'm not kind to people.
Take that quote out of context. I don't like kindness.
All right, I'll just yell at you for the rest of this podcast. No, I want to blow out our microphone.
I think.
Yeah, I feel like kindness is too. It's too general to like. I would associate that with charity. Be charitable to those around you through the things you do and while you're kind.
This list is bad.
It's bad.
Don't listen to this list.
Tisk.
Patience is on here, which is chastity, but also diligence.
Yeah, I would put that somewhere between like diligence and fortitude.
Yeah.
Chastity and diligence. That's a weird combination I don't want to think about. We're getting to the point where Luke's starting to hit the I'm tired phase.
Oh, I was already there. I've just been better at hiding it until now. I was going when I mentioned kindness, I was going to go off on the tangent of the term respect and how it's misused in today's society, but that needs to be its own episode with
a certain individual.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, now that we've gone through them, how do we want to think about the way they interact in the modern world? And we've discussed a lot of them already, but how do they work together?
The virtues or
both? And how do they interact?
Well, I would say with the sins in particular, it's very easy to draw connections between them and how one could lead to another. Just like rapid fire here, you could have sloth that could easily lead to gluttony.
Mm-hmm.
You could describe that as lusting after food, lusting after alcohol. Inebriation through alcohol leads to impaired judgment as it relates to lust.
Perhaps even sloth and the after effects.
Yeah. Hangovers.
Maybe even pride, almost. Bombastic pride.
Sloth could lead to not achieving anything, which could lead to envy of those that have achieved things.
Mm-hmm.
Pride and greed and envy are certainly very interrelated. Wrath is that odd one out that I think it's very obvious why it's bad.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I don't think it's on the list of ones that are accepted, just because it is so blatant in what it means.
I don't know, actually. I would say it's pervasive as well.
Really?
Look no further than a political debate. It's nothing but, from both sides, it's nothing but, look how horrible this individual. It's all ad hominem attacks or attacks on character. And it's very rarely discussions on principle, and those discussions of principle are attacks on character, and they're not actual principle. It's just, this person thinks this, therefore they're bad. Any political ad. Which is why I think wrath, I see why you wouldn't initially include it, because wrath is, I think, of rage, but there's certainly a lot of pervasive just, I hate this person, I wish they would die mentalities that particularly occur in political things.
We were on the topic of how these things connect. I guess I could briefly go into how to apply this in your life, especially as it relates to the sins. It helps to go through each one and identify which ones you have particular problems with. You have problems with at least 4 or 5 of them, trust me.
Absolutely. And if you think you don't, pride.
Pride. Blissful ignorance. That's another.
We've been talking about that a lot.
Write it down. That'll be one.
Blissful ignorance. Read 1984 for that one. And any other dystopian novel. So all in all, what we want to think about with these is like you said, identifying how they appear in our own lives. And the next question then is, how do you attack them? And much like the fears and the weaknesses, it's a premeditated consecutive system that you have to honestly plan out to produce a result. Because you can say, perhaps you believe you're slothful because you spend too much time on your phone too often. You can say, I'm going to spend less time, and it won't work for most individuals. And we were recommending to a friend a little while ago to use perhaps a schedule that literally alerts you at intervals. And as long as you stand to that system...
Is it a coincidence that schedules have appeared in like a third of our podcasts?
It is not a coincidence at all. So then to go on to the next part there, once you've identified them and begun to build a plan to work them out of your lives, and I feel it's incredibly difficult to get them entirely out, but you can certainly do much better than most individuals think is possible.
A particularly effective method I've used is take them one at a time. Either in periods of a few weeks or even months.
And if you feel like it doesn't improve, you take a step back. And that's fine. Theologians have literally spent 2,000 years trying to work out these, and they still haven't. And if they have, pride. And that draws to the final conclusion of the best way to consider what you want instead is to look at the heavenly virtues. Regardless of if you're religious, particularly if you're not even Catholic, which we use as the example in this, these virtues, you'll notice most of them are associated with laws to some degree.
Yeah.
If not good behavior. The word diligence has a positive connotation because it means to work well and to get things done. Justice should have a good connotation in that it's fair treatment. Temperance is being able to control yourself. Courage is being strong in face of danger. Faith is having confidence in what you do, and hope is hoping for more and a better future. And charity is just being nice to other people. All of them work together effectively to create a scenario in which you as an individual give off this, for lack of a better word, aura of kindness.
Yeah.
And a symbol of, and you can use that as a symbol of what you want to achieve, I feel.
I think that's a good place to wrap it up.
I think so.
I'm tired.
Before you fall asleep.
I'm tired.
You're about to hit
I'm
your head on the
slothful.
table.
I'm very slothful.
You've had a long day.
Long 4 days.
Honestly. Luke and I are currently running off Thursday fumes.
Whoa, I passed it up.
So, thank you all for listening to today's episode. It was a little slower one, but it was a little calmer than some of our others.
Yeah.
But I think we certainly discussed a lot of good, important things.
Yeah. Some not intentionally. We even changed the name of the episode midway through.
Great planning.
So, this has been the Two Existential Dudes podcast. I am Luke.
I am Andrew.
And thank you for watching.